Welcome to the Huntington Way Show, where we help parents navigate the educational maze. I'm your host, Yvonne Strachan, author and founder of InspirationalHomeschooling.com. Today's guest is Carolyn Martin, and she is the CHEC Director of Government Relations. Today, we're going to talk about parental rights and concerns that we have with being part of our children's lives. The show is brought to you by our sponsors, the Huntington Learning Center and Inspirational Homeschooling. You're listening on Power Talk 1040 AM, 98.5 FM, and 95.7 FM. Please like and subscribe to Power Talk 1040 on YouTube. Welcome to the show, Carolyn.
Thanks for having me, Bob.
Thanks for being here. You always have great information that us parents really need to know. So, for those who haven't heard our conversations in past episodes, share what your job entails as the CHEC Director of Government Relations.
Yeah, mostly I advocate up at the Capitol for parental rights, religious liberty, and home education. But during the off session, there is always something to do with the administrative state, the boards and commissions that try to enforce the laws that are passed by the legislature. So I kind of watch over those things as well.
So, you uh, just kind of watch over what's coming up.
What's,
And then
yeah,
when legislation sessions start, you watch what's going on.
exactly.
And
I think
then
that's,
let all of us parents and families know.
yes, try to let people know what's going on.
Thank
Yeah.
you so much for doing that. So, what legislation currently do we need to be aware of and push back against?
Yeah, well, in the parental rights front, we've got a lot, going on, I think, and it really centers around this idea of freedom of conscience and parental rights. They kind of go together, right? There was a bill that came up, House Bill 1017, which is talking about the Bill of Rights for foster youth. Um, and so it gives all these rights to foster youth above and beyond parental rights, right? So it says things like the foster youth can they get to have access to their phone, even if there might be a rule in your house. Your house says, nope, we don't do phones at
Mhm.
night. We turn them off or whatever. That wouldn't be allowed in a foster situation. A lot of other things you can't. There's really no way to discipline these foster children. You would have to, and how it ties into freedom of conscience has to do with the gender affirming stuff, right? So if a child comes into your home and is really confused about their gender, you couldn't help them not be confused and
Mm.
affirm their God given gender. You would have to affirm whatever they were saying. So some of these things are coming down the pipe. It's already passed through the House. It's going to be in the Senate soon. But really, this is an overall issue that pits youth against parents. And the way I view parental rights is yes, every person is born with the inalienable rights that we talk about in the Declaration of Independence, in our Constitution. We're born with those inalienable rights. But parents are adults who steward young people's rights until they're capable of making decisions and stewarding their own rights. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And then, but the state says, oh no, as soon as they're born, they've got all their rights and they should be able to responsibly use them
Mm.
in our culture,
Mm.
even at 5, right? This bill for youth bill, foster bill of rights covers 5-year-olds. So they should be able to make decisions for
Oh,
themselves.
yeah, and that's hard because a 5-year-old, they can believe in the tooth fairy and everything is whatever anybody tells them is 100% right. And we're literally having them then make decisions based
Right.
on things that they aren't even aware of or understand or know.
Right. And realistically, that's not true. A
Yeah,
5-year-old's not going to make that decision on their own. Some other adult is going to help them, and
right.
it's just not going to be the parent. It's going to be somebody in the state system
Mm.
that is helping them make those decisions. And we are taking away their innocence, right? Isn't that part of what parents try to do, is to protect them from some of those really hard things that they
Mhm.
can't think through as a 5-year-old because they live in a fantasy world?
Yeah.
We don't want to overburden them with reality that early, you
True.
know?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Well, as parents, we're there to help our kids. We're there to protect them. We're there to care for them. And so, speaking from personal experience, my oldest daughter, she has one chromosome. And so it's one X chromosome. And she was attending a school, and of course, there, when you have one X chromosomes, that really is how you're made, right? But it
Hmm.
affects more than even your gender, like your chromosomes. It affects, like, her frontal lobe is not fully developed. She's had to have heart surgeries, and there's things that it inherently affects. It's deeper within her. So when she was going to school those first few years, of course, some things were hard for her, like math or some of these things, and she just couldn't get it. But some of the other kids were on her about that, and some of the adults are on her like that. And I was just seeing, like, who
Hmm.
she was. She was always
Hmm.
so happy and more sure of herself before she started being influenced by those things. So we pulled her home and we were homeschooling her to just reaffirm her who she is in the way she's made. Like, she's not less than. And so
No,
I think when we're affirming people that, yeah, you know what? You aren't, you are less than. It's not the way that you're made by the creator. You are less than. You are this. And so we're not glorifying the way God made them.
no.
And that really hurts my heart.
Yes, me too.
And
I
we're not there
agree.
to help them if we don't know what's going on.
Hmm.
So that also hurts my
Yeah.
heart.
Hmm.
So, how are these ongoing or timeless issues?
Well, like I was saying, the youth rights is a movement. I mean,
Hmm.
it started, in the 80s, really,
Hmm.
and it's been a movement to lessen parental rights across the world, not just in America. I mean, we're kind of late to this game, but I just want to say that it's not good. It's not good for families. It's not good for youth. And it certainly isn't good for parents. So we need to push back against that. And you see this in many ways. I mean, they've lowered the age of consent on many things. One of the things that they continue to push is this mental health aspect, which ties into some of the stuff we were already talking about. But mental health, to give 12-year-olds, really they wanted it to be 10, and probably they want it to be 5, where 12-year-olds can decide for themselves this mental health care. So they continue to expand these programs. This year there's a bill, Senate Bill 1, that expands a program indefinitely for children to get mental health care without parental knowledge or consent. Just they'd get 6 free, okay, free, which means we, the taxpayers, are paying for it, sessions without parents. And these would be people who would affirm them in whatever delusion they're living in. So we tried to fight against that. To me, it's a parental rights issue. We need to go back to 2019, get rid of that law that gives the children the right to do this without parental knowledge and consent. And then, they do it through the mental health, but they also have done it through other health care as well. Um, that last year they decided that reproductive health care actually includes gender affirming care. And right now, 12-year-olds, actually any age child, can get reproductive health care themselves.
Hmm.
Parents don't need to know about that, whether you're talking abortion, contraceptives, care for STIs or STDs, that kind of stuff, vaccines for STIs, all those kind of things. Children can make that decision themselves. This is a violation. I mean, this is the government getting into the home, the
Hmm.
family, and this is a violation. So they continue to push it in those ways. Mental health, you've got mental health, you've got health in general, those kind of ways is really violating
Hmm.
our parental rights, and we need to say no. And you've got to watch where you send your child, right? To what doctors you put them in front of, because you're going to start getting that question. I know a lot of people have been up in arms because at 14 doctors kick the parents out of the room. Well, you need to find a doctor that won't do that so that
Hmm.
you can be involved with what's going on with your children.
Yeah, because I feel like if we're trying to help our children, and we don't know what's going on, we can't help them. And so that's the
No,
whole thing.
no, and that is a huge thing. I remember in 2019 when they passed the lowering the age of consent, I said, well, can you at least amend it to say if the child is suicidal, the parents need to know? I mean, they're still living in the home.
Hmm.
Parents should be able to know that. And they said, oh, yeah, we'll do that. But then 2 years later, they stripped that out
Hmm.
of the law.
Yeah.
So parents don't really have a right to know what's going on with their child. And that's happening in the public schools as well.
Mm-hmm.
And that goes as early as they determine,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
So,
Well, thanks, Carolyn, for bringing these
yeah.
points up. When we come back, we'll talk more about the trajectory and what you can do. Welcome back to the Huntington Way Show. You're listening on Power Talk 1040 AM, 98.5 FM, and 95.7 FM. Please like and subscribe to Power Talk 1040 on YouTube. I'm your host, Yvonne Strachan, and I'm here with Carolyn Martin. We're talking about the parental rights and religious freedom and our liberties, our homeschooling freedom as well. And what we're talking about is what you can do about the legislation that's coming up. So, Carolyn, this is such an important time to fight back for parental rights, religious liberty, and homeschool freedom. And we must get more people to testify. What message do you have for people to encourage them to take action?
Oh, your voice is needed. Don't think your voice isn't needed. It's needed up there to speak into these issues. When nobody comes up to oppose a bill, and that's usually what I'm doing up there at this
Hmm.
point in time, um, then they think nobody opposes it. Nobody opposes this. This is fine. Nobody's up here complaining about what we're doing up here. Oh no, we need to raise our voice, and we need to let other people know what's really going on, because it might take a couple years before it actually impacts your life, but today is the day you need to say something about that.
Yeah. So, I'm going to talk about I was up there 3 or 4 weeks ago, and I had my kids with me. And so there's a gallery there that people can go and watch legislative sessions at any point, right?
Yes.
And so I really encourage you to bring your family up there and your kids because they need to know what happens in legislator and in those sessions, in those legislator sessions. And so during this particular session, they were talking about the foster care that you were talking about earlier and the rights and everything with it. And before that, they were talking about 4-H and different things. So some of the votes are really easy when it's like, okay, yeah, we support 4-H, but some of the votes are very hard. So in this particular case, they were talking about the foster care and affirming genders, and then not being able to look at the phones, and you know, being able to just disciple those children and help them. And so one of the people got up and they were against the bill, and she was had a lot of good points, many, many good points, but just the way that you address the legislator makes a big difference. And one of the things that she did was just put down the legislation. And then the other side got up and then they didn't put down the legislation, but they made points kind of like from personal, you know, stories. And so I think that's such an important thing. And it was an important thing for my kids to see that personal stories impact. And then also, how do you get your point across without, um, putting people down? Because if you put that legislator down, are they really going to vote for what you're talking about, or are they just going to close their ears? You don't
Right.
want to like, you're no good, or tell
Yeah.
them that your process isn't working or whatever. You want to encourage them and say what they're doing is important, but we need your vote because these are important issues, and really stick to those. So, Carolyn, I know I gave some pointers, but I know you have many more pointers and tips about testifying and during a legislative session.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And what your family observed was actually the legislators debating, which they can debate all the time that they want to on
Uh-huh.
a bill. So that's what you were experiencing. And sometimes it helps to give them information as well. So there's another process you can do. Like if you know your legislators with you, you can feed them information that they can then use in arguments that you saw on the floor. But the public actually gets, for a bill that goes through the whole process, two opportunities to have their voice heard in committee hearings. So, what you would want to do is look at the bills that you might be interested in testifying for or against. Make sure you read it, um, because Unfortunately, the legislators don't necessarily read it, but if you're talking intelligently about the bill, it'll go a long way. So you read the bill, you come up with a testimony that might be 2 or 3 minutes. That's really all you get is 2 or 3 minutes to say something. So you want to make sure you make a couple of points. But in those points, if you can pull out an experience or have a story, like you said, it pulls on those heartstrings, which then they do respond to because they're not really thinking about it, not all of them, in an intellectual fashion. They really are just going along with an agenda. So
Mm,
you need to try to shift them off of that agenda, to put a hole in their agenda somehow. And you can do that with stories. Facts are always good too, statistics. Don't shy away from them, but try to pull in a story if you can. There's a couple ways you can testify. You can go up there and testify. That's the most powerful because you're looking them in the eye and they have to look you in the eye, right?
mm,
And you're in the room so that you can see what's really going on. When you're online, it's harder to really know what's going on. They look like a dot on a screen and you don't really know how they're responding to you. But you can do it online. Since COVID, they've allowed remote testimony. So you can do it from the comfort of your home. So that's always something. So if that's all you can do that because that's important as well. Because the more people that show up and say something, the more it gets on the record, what we call the legislative record. So judges, if they're looking at a law and they want to dig in, what really happened when you guys passed this law, they can hear the other side of the
mm,
argument that didn't want the bill passed.
mhm.
And you get to be a part of the public record that opposed it, which is very important.
Yeah, that is important. And so, if somebody is going to testify, do you recommend writing what they want to
I
say
do.
down?
I still do. I've been doing this is my eighth session. I still write it down because I'm afraid I'll go off script. And that would
Hmm.
not be good sometimes. I want to know, okay, what I said. What did the Lord ask me to say? I'm going to say that. Sometimes he asks me to change stuff
Hmm.
and I do it, but usually I write it down because I want to make sure I'm within that time limit.
Hmm.
When you go over, it just becomes annoying to them and then they stop listening. I mean, there's just so many things that could cause them to stop listening. And one of those other things is if you start quoting scripture at them, that's gonna they'll just stop listening.
Hmm.
Doesn't mean you can't mention the principles or even quote a verse. Just don't say it came out of this Bible and this chapter, because it doesn't help the situation at all. Doesn't mean
Hmm.
you can't speak those principles.
Oh, yeah.
So do that, but definitely time yourself. Make sure you're going to stay within time and do that. And the other thing is, it is a really dark place up there. You when I sit in these committee rooms and I start listening to their stories, right? The abuse, usually the
Mm,
people who've gotten killed or whatever, and it starts getting to you. You've got to continually focus yourself back on what is true,
mm,
because what they're trying to do is build law on rare cases. But think about the principles. Is this a role of government? Is this really what will solve the problem? Don't forget why you're there, and don't get off track. But also bring somebody with you because it's not going to be easy. You're going to be nervous. I still get nervous. Um, and it's always good to have a support person there with you to help you get through that because there'll
okay.
be, but if it's a contentious issue, there'll be a lot of people
Yeah,
on
that's
either
true.
side.
Yeah, and I've noticed that the room can get loud
The room
also.
can get loud.
Yeah,
Yes, that's
definitely.
right.
Yeah. So, can you offer words of encouragement for someone who might fear it, fear testifying?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, bring bring somebody with you.
Okay.
But I always suggest, praying about it. I mean,
Hmm.
I still pray about, do I need to testify on this? Is
Hmm.
what I'm going to say what you need for the future?
Good.
And so that's always important to do it. And I think that that centers you, right?
Hmm.
So if you're going into it, this is what I'm supposed to do. Just be confident in what you know is the truth.
Good. How can listeners sign up to testify in front of the Senate or the House?
Yeah, it's easy. You just go to the legislative website, which is leg.colorado.gov and /testimony. And right there, you can tell them you want to testify. Just know what bill it is, what committee it's being heard in, and you can sign up.
Great. And if somebody can't testify, how else can they participate?
Well, you can always email the legislators on the committees, or if it's before the whole House or Senate, you can always email them and let your opinion be heard. Certainly for your legislator, the one that represents you, make sure they know where you stand on an issue. But prayer is huge. You
Yeah.
need to be praying about these things. We need that covering. The people that are up there are legislators fighting for religious liberty and parental rights, but they're in the super, super, uber minority. So they need your prayer because that's the only way they get through the day.
Oh, that's good. And we can support them, right?
Yes,
Even a good, supportive letter or email goes a long way as well, if it's
absolutely.
somebody who's on
And
your side.
yeah, and just even coming up there and with a smile and a prayer for them or food, they like food too. That 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 encourages them and gives them strength.
Oh, good. So, how can listeners connect with you or be informed about the legislative issues?
Yeah, so if you sign up for my prayer email at chec.org/freedom, you'll know what's going on up there, and you can stay abreast of what bills are up and out there that I'm watching.
Great. Thank you so much, Carolyn, for
Thank you.
sharing this wonderful information. I hope it helps our listeners. This is Yvonne Strachan, today's host on the Huntington Way Show, where we support you in educating your kids. Thank you for joining us.